The sleet off Lake Superior didn't fall so much as arrive, sideways and relentless, the kind of weather that makes no distinction between a storm and a siege. Former Corporal Cassidy Rourke pressed herself against a hydro pole on a logging road outside Timmins, one arm locked around her Belgian Malinois, and understood with quiet certainty that they had reached the end of what a person can endure on stubbornness. Alone, then an old man walked out of the dark carrying a lantern and said 4 words that she would carry for the rest of her life. The wind that night was coming off the lake at 60 kilometers an hour, and the temperature had dropped to -31. Cassidy had not eaten in 3 days. She was aware of this the way she was aware of the cracked rib that had never properly healed, as a constant background frequency, something she had learned to function around rather than address. What she could not function around was Flint. She pulled her Canadian Forces field jacket off her own shoulders, the last authentic piece of her military service she still possessed, and draped it over the shivering Malinois cradled in her arms. The sleet hit her thermal shirt like a handful of needles. She did not register the cold as a problem. She registered Flint's breathing, which was wrong in a way it had not been 2 weeks ago. Shallow, effortful, the breathing of an animal that has been slowly losing a battle. Nobody told him he was fighting. "I know, buddy," she said quietly, pressing her face into the wet fur of his neck. "I know." They had been fugitives for 17 months. 17 months of freight trains and church basements, and borrowed pickup trucks that died in the cold. 17 months of choosing between food for herself and medication for the dog, and always choosing the dog. To the Canadian Armed Forces, Cassidy Rourke was a deserter and a criminal, a signals corporal, who had gone AWOL from CFB Petawawa and stolen a classified military working dog with a designation instead of a name. To Cassidy, she was simply a person who had refused to let her partner be killed by paperwork. The nightmare had started on an ordinary Thursday. Her unit had returned from a classified JTF-2 support operation in a region that did not appear in any report she was permitted to read. The final minutes of the mission had disintegrated, a secondary device, an evacuation under fire, a dark stairwell where Flint had done exactly what his training demanded, retrieve the intelligence object and protect it at all costs. He had found the encrypted drive on the floor of a blown safe and taken it in his mouth as they ran. When the second explosion rocked the building and enemy contact surged from 3 directions, Flint had done the next thing his training required. He had swallowed it. His handlers had never had cause to question the behavior. It was doctrine. Nobody had known what he was carrying until Major Colin Presswick, the logistics officer responsible for cataloging the raid's recovered intelligence, reviewed the helmet camera footage 4 days later and watched on a 60-centimeter monitor in a quiet office at CFB Petawawa 14 seconds of shaky video that changed everything. Flint at the edge of the blown safe. Jaws working briefly, the drive disappearing. Presswick had not reported the discovery up his chain of command. Instead, he had summoned Cassidy to his office and informed her with the flat efficiency of a man reading from a spreadsheet that Flint had sustained a traumatic brain injury during the blast, rendering him operationally unfit, that his pain levels were beyond management, and that euthanasia was scheduled for the following morning at 0800. He had delivered this information without looking up from his desk. Cassidy had asked to adopt Flint. She had cited the regulations that permitted handlers to take retired dogs home. She had done something she had never done in uniform. She had begged. Presswick had cited a clearance-level restriction and shown her to the door. That night, Cassidy did not sleep. She walked into the veterinary facility, clipped Flint's lead, cut his tracking chip free with a sterilized blade, and walked off the base into the dark. She made it to a cousin's truck by 4 in the morning and crossed 2 provincial borders before noon. What she had not known was why Presswick had wanted the dog destroyed so quickly, so quietly, and with such a rigid timeline. What she had not known was what she was actually carrying with her when she ran. The lantern appeared before she heard the footsteps. A warm amber circle of light moving steadily through the sleet, approaching without urgency. Cassidy's hand went to the heavy steel flashlight at her belt. She stepped in front of Flint. "Don't," said a voice from behind the lantern, old, deliberate, carrying a particular authority that did not require volume. "That dog cannot stand on his own 4 legs. Whatever you're planning to do with that torch, it won't be necessary." The lantern stopped 2 meters away. The man holding it was perhaps 86 years old, built narrow and standing perfectly straight in a waxed canvas coat and tall rubber boots. His face had been arranged by decades of northern weather into something angular and weathered and settled. His eyes were grey and very still, and they moved from Cassidy to Flint and back with the methodical precision of a person who has spent a career evaluating situations rather than reacting to them. "That is a standard issue Canadian Forces K9 tactical harness," he said. "The carry protocol for an injured military working dog is taught at CFB Borden. You're executing it correctly." "Which means you've been trained. The fact that you're executing it on a logging road at midnight tells me you're not where you're supposed to be." Cassidy kept her voice flat. "Who are you?" "Edmund Lacroix," the old man said. "Retired Chief Superintendent, Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And you are standing in the worst sleet event to hit this region in a decade. If that animal means anything to you, I suggest we stop talking and start walking." He turned and moved back up the road without looking to see if she followed. Cassidy looked down at Flint. The dog's eyes found hers in the dark, and what was in them? The particular dimness that had been spreading behind his gaze for the past 3 weeks made her chest close like a fist. She picked him up and walked after the old man. The farmhouse at the end of the road was built from fieldstone in the Laurentian style, low and wide and solid, its windows putting warm orange light into the dark. Edmund held the door without ceremony. Inside it was swelteringly warm and smelled of wood smoke and coffee grounds and the particular mustiness of old paper. Files, Cassidy realized. A lifetime of files. The walls were covered. RCMP commendations, framed citations, a folded flag in a shadow box, and photographs. A woman in federal court robes, severe and composed. The same woman at a committee table in what looked like a parliamentary building. The same woman again, younger, laughing on a dock with a border collie at her feet. "Put him on the blanket," Edmund said from the kitchen. "Not too close to the stove. Warm him gradually." Cassidy lowered Flint onto a thick wool blanket near the hearth. The dog stretched out with a long shuddering exhale and went still. She sat cross-legged beside him and counted his breaths. Edmund returned with 2 mugs of black tea and a shallow bowl of cooked ground beef and rice. He set the bowl beside Flint without commentary. "Small amounts," Cassidy said, already portioning the food into her palm. "He'll eat too fast." "I know," Edmund said. "I handled dogs for 12 years in the Yukon." She fed Flint from her hand, small measured amounts, watching his face the way she had watched it every day for 17 months, cataloguing the small signals that told her whether he was gaining ground or losing it. He ate with desperate, shivering focus. When his head finally dropped to her knee with the heaviness of genuine exhaustion rather than collapse, she allowed herself to drink the tea. It scalded her throat, and she did not care. "You didn't ask for my name," she said at last. "I know your name, Corporal Rourke." Edmund was seated in a high-backed chair across the room, both hands folded over the head of a walking stick she hadn't noticed before. "I've known it for the better part of a year." The mug stopped halfway to her lips. Edmund reached to the side table and set a sealed manila envelope on the wool blanket between them. It landed with the density of something that had been carried for a long time, waiting for the right moment to be set down. "My wife," he said, "was the Honorable Marguerite Lacroix, federal court judge. She spent the last 18 months of her life quietly building an evidentiary case against a Canadian Armed Forces logistics officer who had been diverting funds from a classified procurement stream for 6 years. Falsified equipment contracts with a private defense manufacturer in Halifax. The scheme involved redirected funds in excess of $30 million. He paused. "My wife was found dead in her vehicle on Highway 17 last January. Single car accident, black ice. The investigation was closed in 11 days. Cassidy looked at him. "Presswick," she said. "Lieutenant Colonel, as of 8 months ago." Edmund's voice did not change pitch, but something beneath it shifted. A tectonic thing, deep and slow and final. "He was promoted while your dog was being hunted. When I tell you what I am about to tell you, Corporal, I need you to remain seated." She waited. The financial ledger that ends Presswick's career, his freedom, and the careers of 3 senior officers who facilitated his scheme is sitting inside your dog. Edmund's grey eyes did not leave hers. During the operation, Flint retrieved an encrypted tactical data capsule from the raid target's destroyed safe. It was Presswick's off-books ledger, stored on a drive he had given to the insurgent financier as collateral for a money transfer. Presswick reviewed the helmet footage after the evacuation and understood what Flint had swallowed. He scheduled the euthanasia to retrieve the capsule from the dog's stomach before anyone asked questions. "When you ran, Corporal, you did not simply steal government property. You walked off that base carrying the only piece of evidence that can send a murderer to prison for the rest of his life." Edmund's grip on the walking stick tightened. "My wife's murderer." Cassidy's hand pressed flat against Flint's side. "Open the envelope," Edmund said quietly. She did. Veterinary imaging printouts. Their origin she did not ask about. In the center of the uppermost film, a dense white rectangle glowed bright against the gray of surrounding tissue. Lodged in Flint's upper intestinal tract, she had attributed his deteriorating condition to the blast injury, to the malnutrition, to 17 months of inadequate care. She had been so certain she understood what was wrong with him. "The capsule is titanium," Edmund said. "It cannot be digested and it is too large to pass. It has been creating a toxic blockage for 17 months. You thought you were keeping him alive. In fact, you were both keeping each other alive, and he has been slowly dying of the thing inside him that neither of you knew was there." The words settled over her like something cold. "He needs a surgeon," Cassidy said. Her voice sounded strange to her. "Tonight." "Already arranged." Edmund stood and pulled a cord near the kitchen doorway. A woman in her late 50s came through the rear door, carrying a stainless steel medical case with the ease of someone who has carried it many times before. Her movements were efficient and without drama. She wore a fleece pullover and her grey-streaked hair was pulled back. "Corporal Rourke," Edmund said. "This is Dr. Sylvie Calder, Chief Veterinary Surgeon, CFB Valcartier, retired. 22 years of operating on military working dogs. She owes me a conversation from 2009 that I have never collected on." Something in his expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Tonight seems appropriate." Dr. Calder crouched beside Flint and ran practiced hands along his abdomen. Her face gave away nothing except competence. "His heart rate is elevated but workable. We have a window." She looked up at Cassidy. "I need your consent and I need you outside this room." Cassidy started to protest. "He will be fine," Dr. Calder said. "You will not be if you watch. There is a difference between courage and interference, Corporal." Cassidy lowered herself until she was eye level with Flint. She pressed her forehead to the top of his head and held it there for 3 seconds. Feeling the particular warmth of him, the rise and fall of his breathing, the specific irreplaceable weight of this animal she had chosen above everything else. "I'll be right outside," she told him. "Come back to me." She straightened and walked out of the room. The power cut at 11:47. Not a flicker, a hard, deliberate severance, the kind produced when someone manually opens an exterior breaker box. Edmund was on his feet before the darkness fully settled. "Back porch," he said very quietly. He cut the line from outside. The generator engaged in the room behind them, restoring light to where Dr. Calder was working. The rest of the house remained dark and silent, except for the sleet against the windows and the deep ticking of a long-case clock. "How many?" Cassidy said. "One. He came alone. Presswick wouldn't risk more people knowing where he sent someone." Edmund reached behind the wood stove and produced a Remington 870 that had been maintained with evident care over a long period. He held it with the comfort of familiarity. "Stay back from the windows," Cassidy said, "and stay low." "Corporal!" Edmund's voice stopped her at the hall entrance. "I spent 31 years conducting operations in conditions that would have ended most careers before they started. Please do not tell me to stay low in my own house." She moved into the dark hallway. The intruder came through the mudroom window, a professional entry, glass scored and lifted, rather than broken, minimal displacement of sound. She heard one boot on the linoleum and went flat against the hallway wall, slowing her breathing, letting the dark work for her the way darkness had worked for her on operations where the rules of engagement were cleaner than this. She tracked him by sound through 2 rooms, systematic sweeping pattern, tactical light used in short pulses. When he stepped through the kitchen doorway into the hall, she moved. The heavy flashlight connected with the side of his night vision optics and rocked him hard into the doorframe. He recovered faster than she had prepared for, fed and rested against her 17 months of attrition, and drove an elbow into her injured ribs with enough force that her left side went white with pain. She went to one knee and came back off for a distance where his size became a liability. Suving was the... They hit the floor together, a suppressed pistol discharged into the ceiling. Plaster fell in a soft white curtain. He was larger, and he had not been running on almost nothing for the better part of 2 years. He got his forearm across her throat and began pressing with the efficient patience of someone who has done this before. "Presswick sends his regards," he said. The Remington discharged from the end of the hallway. The concussion in the enclosed space was total. The man's weight dropped onto Cassidy all at once. She shoved him off and rolled clear, gasping, her vision pulsing at the edges. Edmund Lacroix stood 10 feet away, the shotgun lowered now, his face entirely composed. "He does not get to send his regards in my house," Edmund said. He looked at Cassidy on the floor with an expression that was not pity, but was something close to recognition. One soldier taking inventory of another. "Can you stand?" She could. It took a moment, but she could. The intercom panel on the hallway wall, a relic from the farmhouse's earlier life as something larger, clicked and hissed. "Edmund," Dr. Calder's voice came through exhausted and precise. "I have the capsule. Flint is stable." His vitals held through the procedure. A brief pause. "He's going to be all right." Cassidy sat down on the hallway floor. She pressed both hands over her face and did not make a sound for a long time. The encrypted capsule reached the RCMP's National Division in Ottawa 71 hours later, forwarded through channels that Edmund Lacroix had spent 3 decades carefully cultivating and had never once used for anything personal. Until now. Lieutenant Colonel Colin Presswick was arrested at his desk at National Defense Headquarters on a Thursday morning, the same day of the week it had all started, by officers who had been fully briefed and brought no interest in professional courtesies. He was charged with fraud exceeding $30 million, breach of public trust, criminal negligence causing death, and conspiracy to commit murder. The charges were not fast in proceeding, because federal proceedings never are, but they were thorough, and they were public, and every document that Marguerite Lacroix had spent the last 18 months of her life compiling was entered into the record. Cassidy's pardon arrived on a Tuesday in March, when the snow was beginning to retreat from the fieldstone walls, and the first Canada geese were moving north along the flyway over the lake. Her honorable discharge was reinstated with full back pay. Her medical benefits were restored. The letter was 3 paragraphs and signed by people with important titles. And she read it once and set it on the kitchen table. Then she picked up the second document. It was a single page from the Department of National Defense, stamped in blue ink and signed in the margin by 2 people she had never met. It transferred military working dog designation MWD CF-119 to the permanent custody of former Corporal Cassidy Rourke, effective immediately, with no conditions of return. Flint, 14 kilograms heavier than he had been on the logging road, wearing a properly fitted harness and moving on a repaired hip that Dr. Calder had described in her precise way as better than anyone deserves after what was done to it, was investigating Edmund's border collie with the careful courtesy of a dog who has learned to receive good things slowly. He moved well, not perfectly, but well, and with a steadiness that had been absent for a very long time. Edmund came into the kitchen and set a mug of tea in front of her without being asked. He looked at the document on the table without commenting on it. "We should go," Cassidy said. "We've been here 6 weeks. We've stayed far past what's reasonable." Edmund sat down across from her. He took his time about it. Dr. Calder needs someone to help move surgical equipment on Saturdays. The road requires clearing every time it snows, which in this part of Ontario is quite often. He looked out the window at the pale March light falling across the fieldstone wall. "My wife used to say that a good investigator never walks away from a case before it is properly closed." He was quiet for a moment. "I think she would have considered this one still open. The house is considerably too large for 1 person and 1 border collie." He glanced toward the hearth, where Flint had settled with his chin resting on the border collie's back, his amber eyes closed and his breathing slow and even and entirely at rest. "Besides, the dog has clearly made a decision. In my experience, the dog is usually right." Cassidy looked at Flint for a long moment. For the first time in 17 months, she had nowhere else to be. "Yes, sir," she said. "I think you're right."